Hello and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Deadly Destinations, where we visit the sites of terrible events. Sometimes they're murders and sometimes they're mass murders. Today I'm coming to you from downtown Portland, where the I-5 serial killer took his victims. I'm going to take you on a little tour of the town and we will visit some of the infamous sites. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin.
Oh, Portland, where do I even begin? There is no place on earth like Portland, Oregon. It is strange, it is wild, and it is absolutely breathtaking. The scenery here in Portland is unmatched. This place is sometimes overshadowed by Seattle, its northern and larger neighbor, and something tells me Portland residents like it that way. This is where you come when you're just a little too odd, even for oddball Seattle. This is where you come to be an individual, to live your life in the way you see fit, and to be with people who understand you. Portland is the largest city in the state of Oregon. It sits at the meeting of the Willamette and Columbia Rivers. There are about 650,000 people here, putting it around the 26th most populated city in America, but there are over 2 million people in the Portland metropolitan area. The city was named after Portland, Maine in the 1840s after settlers came here on the Oregon Trail. By the late 1800s, Portland had a reputation for being one of the most dangerous port cities in the world. It was a hub for racketeering and organized crime, and the murder rate was very high. World War II brought a great boom to Portland because many of its factories were set up to manufacture things needed in the war. By the 1960s, this rough and rugged little city had become a den for progressive values and politics, and is now one of the cities in America that you would say is populated mainly by a counterculture. Whatever you've heard about how awful Portland is, how bad the homeless problem is here, how dangerous the city is, it's all lies. Over the last 2 years, I have spent months at a time in Sacramento, Seattle, Albuquerque, Phoenix, Oakland, and Denver. All of those cities have worse problems with homelessness than what I saw here in Portland, and I was here in the summer. There are people who love to exaggerate the problems in cities with more progressive values because it suits their narrative. But the truth of the matter is, all large cities have homeless problems. All large cities have social problems. And it's only the talking heads on the news and the people who puppet them that want you to believe those problems are worse than they are. Always remember, guys, their goal is to keep us fighting with each other, because if we ever stop doing that, the powers that be won't have their yachts and their third homes and their private jets anymore. They have to keep us fighting each other so we don't fight them. Never lose sight of that, my friends. To say that Portland is green is too far boring and nondescript. Portland is bursting with life. It is so lush and so beautiful and so vibrant here that it's hard to put it into words. The city has the perfect climate for growing roses, and that's where the city's moniker, the City of Roses, came from. The city is home to the International Rose Test Garden, which is home to over 10,000 rose bushes of 650 different varieties. And it's not just roses that the climate is perfect for. Look at this little park just outside our hotel. We were just walking down to the waterway for dinner, and I smelled something so spectacular. So we wandered off the sidewalk just a little bit, and this is what we found. Video and photos don't even do it justice. It smelled like heaven. There was a light breeze, and I'm not joking when I say I could have laid down in the dirt and taken a nap. On our walk through this little flower garden, the weather was just perfectly warm with a cool breeze coming off the water. The sun was setting, and it was just one of those moments for me where I realize how happy I am to be alive, to have my relative health back, and to be fortunate enough to take in the beauty of the world around me. Someone put a lot of thought and planning into this little spot, but nature is ultimately in charge, and she is on full display here. Just absolutely gorgeous, stunning colors and varieties, and this is pretty typical of everything we saw throughout Portland. The people here are exactly what you'd expect. If you've watched a single episode of Portlandia, or if you're like me and have watched them all multiple times, the reason that show is so funny is because it's so close to the truth. There are a lot of weirdos here, and I absolutely love it. This place has it all. Hippies, bookstore feminists, male feminists, witches, crunchies, artisans, nerds, gutter punks. They're all here, and I've never met such nice folks. If you don't like weirdos, I'm comfortable in saying that's a you problem, because weirdos are the nicest people on earth. I'm going to show you a little more of Portland throughout the episode, and then of course we are going to eat here, and wow, the food. I had a hard time choosing what to show you because we had so much good food here. Portland is one of the hottest spots in the world right now to be a chef, to experiment with cuisine, or to practice very old world style cooking. It's just everything I could ever want as a culinary adventurer, and I have plans in the works to come back here for an extended stay and produce an episode where we focus on the dark side of Portland along with the culinary scene here, because it's just that good and merits that kind of attention. When it came time to leave, my husband had to drag us out of here. He wanted to stay too. I could live here. I could definitely live here, no question about it. And I don't say that about all of the cities I visit. Portland is simply spectacular. As we've discussed here on this channel in the past, the Pacific Northwest, as much as we love it, is attached to some very dark facts. You are more likely to be killed by a serial killer here in the Pacific Northwest than anywhere else in the country. This area has also produced more serial killers than anywhere else in the country. Maybe it's the rain. Maybe it's the fact that there are so many ports here. Maybe it's the industrial vibe of the whole area. Who knows? Serial killers love this place, and today we are talking about an especially unusual one. Randall Brent Woodfield was born on December 26, 1950 in Salem, Oregon. He has two sisters. One became a doctor and the other became an attorney. Randall became a monster. He was raised in Otter Rock, Oregon, and attended Newport High School, where he began to exhibit some very disturbing behavior quite early on. He was first arrested as a young teenager for exposing himself to a group of girls. But here's the thing. Randall was not just a great football player, he was one of the best Oregon had ever seen. He was top of the top. And as we know, when you've got that kind of athletic ability, people will go to great lengths to keep you out of trouble. And that's exactly what happened in Randall's case. His coaches covered up the incident, but to his parents' credit, they did force him to get into therapy. He graduated from high school, had his record expunged, and went on to Treasure Valley Community College in Ontario, Oregon, before transferring to Portland State University in 1970, where he played as a wide receiver. He was very successful on the football team, and he also got very, very involved with a Christian student group called Campus Crusade for Christ. I always wonder, when we so often hear about serial killers who are religious, if they're religious because they're trying to fight their demons, or if they're religious because religious folks tend to be a bit more open, sometimes more gullible than others, and they're there to prey on them. It's one of those questions that keeps me fascinated. Randall Woodfield is remembered as quiet and a little strange by people who knew him. One of his football coaches recalls that he was quiet and polite, hardworking and coachable. He actually said he was one of the nicest guys he had ever coached. But people also remember that he was odd and he didn't have a lot of friends. Not long after arriving at Portland State, Randall vandalized his ex-girlfriend's apartment and was then arrested twice for public indecency. With just 3 semesters left to graduation, Randall was selected as a wide receiver in the 1974 NFL Draft by the Green Bay Packers. He packed his bags and left college just shy of graduating and headed towards training camp. However, once there, his problems became magnified. He didn't seem to get along with others. He acted strangely and seemed to be troubled. The stress became great for him and his athletic performance suffered. He signed a contract to play for the Packers, but was then cut during training camp and never played a single NFL game. He played the 1974 season with the semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs with the intention of trying out for the Packers again the following season. Well, it never happened because Randall could not keep his dangly bits to himself. He was arrested a dozen times in 1974 for flashing, for exposing himself to women. A dozen times. That means he was most likely doing this all the time, as the arrest rate for that crime is actually very low. The Packers had had enough with this strange guy and decided to end their contract with Randall. He was not asked back to training camp the following year. Randall returned to Portland in 1974, angry and disgraced after his public failure. By 1975, his behavior escalated to SA. He would stop women in secluded areas, pull a knife, and force them to perform acts on him. So many of these attacks occurred that the police put out undercover female officers, and their sting worked. They caught Randall in April of 1975, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his crimes. He served only 4 years of that sentence and was freed in July of 1975, and he was just getting started. On October 9, 1980, Sherry Lynn Ayers, who was a former classmate of Randall's, was assaulted and murdered in her apartment in downtown Portland. Sherry Lynn had known Randall since the 2nd grade. They had grown up together. They were friends, so much so that Sherry had written letters to Randall while he was in prison. Police called Randall in when he found out Sherry had been writing to him, and they felt he was being very evasive when they questioned him. But they did some testing on the semen found at the crime, and it didn't match Randall's blood type, so he was let go. I had a hard time finding information as to whether or not this was a mismatch, maybe it was a mistake, or what later came of that, because Randall was eventually determined to be her killer. A month after he killed Sherry Lynn, he drove to the home of his friend's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Darcy Renee Fix. She was there at home with a man named Douglas Keith Atlig. Randall attacked the couple, bound them, and shot them execution style in Darcy's home. Again, because Randall knew Darcy, he was questioned, but law enforcement didn't have enough information to arrest him at the time. Randall Woodfield then seemed to become emboldened. He had a small VW Bug, and he starts cruising around the Pacific Northwest looking for victims. At the time, he was working right here as a bouncer and a bartender. This bar, now called the Dublin Pub, used to be called Fawcett Tavern here in Beaverton. And the job Randall had here made him enough money to take these trips up and down I-5. I read a thread that said even as a bouncer and bartender, Randall Woodfield made women nervous. They didn't like him, despite the fact that he was handsome and had a very nice physique. He was creepy. He put people off, even in the bar scene. Randall then goes on a series of robberies starting in December of 1980 in Vancouver, Washington. He robbed drive-ins and gas stations all along I-5, choosing those locations because he felt he had the best chance of catching a woman alone in those places at night. He also committed SAs during these crimes, at one of them even committing that crime against 2 children, 2 sisters in the home he robbed. It wasn't until January 12th that he used his gun, shooting a female clerk at a Vancouver gas station, but luckily that woman survived. Just 4 days later, he would rob and shoot 2 women in a Salem office building. One of the women, Beth Wilmot, survived, but the other, Shari Hull, was murdered. It's hard to know just how many robberies and assaults were committed by Randall during this time period because there were so many reports, and not all of them turned out to be him, but he was most definitely on a spree. On February 3rd, 1981, the bodies of 37-year-old Donna Eckerd and her 14-year-old daughter were found together in their home in Mountain Gate, California. The girl had also been assaulted. That same day, Randall kidnapped and assaulted a motel clerk in Redding, California, and that night, he robbed a man in an Ashland, Oregon motel. Randall Woodfield was completely out of control. He then went to Corvallis, Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue. In each city, he robbed businesses and assaulted women. Randall then decided to return home to Portland and chose to have, of all things, a Valentine's Day party at the Marriott Hotel in downtown Portland. I find that detail so strange. I've never heard of a serial killer throwing a Valentine's Day party before, and I think this fact puts a fine point on what an unusual guy this is. Randall invited some of his old friends from college to his party, and not one of them showed up. Sad, but again, evidence that this is an unlikable guy. People did not want to be around him. I'm sure he was upset, and so he left the Marriott and drove to Beaverton to the home of Julie Wrights, an 18-year-old he had met while working at the Fawcett, again now called Dublin Pub. He got to her home around 2 a.m. and somehow managed to talk his way inside. Julie had apparently offered him a glass of wine. She appeared to have been making coffee in the kitchen when she was attacked. Randall assaulted Julie and then shot her in the head, killing her. The police now had multiple victims that were all tied to Randall Woodfield in some way, and their sights were set directly on him. As the investigation continued, Randall continued to rob and commit assaults along I-5, and he was also aware that the press was now calling him the I-5 Bandit. On March 5, 1981, the Salem police brought Randall in for an interrogation after one of his victims, Lisa Garcia, identified him from a photo lineup. The Portland police then searched Randall's apartment, where they discovered a spent .32 caliber shell casing in one of his duffel bags, as well as a roll of tape that matched tape found on his bound victims. Randall Woodfield was arrested and taken into custody on March 7th, and on March 16th, he was indicted for murder, assault, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and illegal possession of firearms, all resulting from his crimes in both Washington and Oregon. That summer, Randall was tried for the murder of Shari Hull in Salem and the attempted murder of Beth Wilmot, who again had survived. An interesting side note, Randall was prosecuted by Chris Van Dyke, who is the son of actor Dick Van Dyke. Chris Van Dyke later said Randall was, quote, the coldest, most detached defendant I've ever seen. On June 26, 1981, Randall Woodfield was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years for his horrific crimes. He later had 35 years added to that sentence for assaults and weapon charges related to crimes in Benton County, Oregon. This is what Randall Woodfield looks like now. He is still in the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem, Oregon. He tried to sue true crime author Ann Rule for libel back in April of 1987, but his suit was thrown out. By 1990, with advancements in DNA testing, police had tied Randall Woodfield to 44 homicides here in the Pacific Northwest, and he was tied to 2 more murders from 1980 and 1981 later on. This is an incredibly dangerous and vile killer, a strange man that surprisingly many people do not know about. He terrorized this beautiful and peaceful area, destroying lives as he cut a path all along I-5, but luckily the police did not give up, and he is now right where he belongs. As we always do on this playlist, we dine in our deadly destination. We had so much good food here in Portland. We had an incredible meal at South Park Seafood. Look at this lemon tart. It's one of the best I've ever had. We had world-famous ice cream from Salt and Straw that was every bit as good as its reputation. I can still taste that honey lavender and this malted chocolate chip cookie dough. Oh my gosh, you guys. We had glazed salmon and oysters and clam chowder and fresh shrimp. But I chose to take you along to dinner at this gorgeous little Italian spot on the water. This is Il Terrazzo, and it is spectacular. It's located on the Tom McCall waterfront in Portland, which has some beautiful views of the water. This award-winning bistro focuses on seasonal traditional cuisine from Italy. We started with this stunning dish of sun-dried tomatoes on fresh mozzarella to die for. We had this gorgeous salami and prosciutto on some of the most delicious, crusty house-made bread I've had in a while. My husband ordered the lasagna. Look at this beautiful thing. I believe the waitress said the chef guarantees 15 layers in this lasagna. The noodles were so tender and the sauce was so flavorful. It was a bit different from some lasagnas I've had, but that's what I love about lasagna. Everyone has their own version. I ordered the bolognese, as I almost always do in a new place. It came on gorgeous, freshly made noodles that were perfect in texture and chew. The sauce was deep and richly flavored, the kind of flavor you only get from a skilled hand and time. Just a little bit of salty Parmesan on top, and oh my, what a meal. We actually debated on whether or not to come back here a second time, but ultimately decided that there were too many other places we wanted to try. But it was that good. Portland is just dreamy. It has its issues, as all places do, but of all the places I have been, it's at the top of my list. It's gorgeously green, it's rugged, it's individualist, and yes, it is home to a very vicious serial killer who took lives without a second thought. It's a sad story born in a very beautiful and intoxicating city.
Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Deadly Destinations. Like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. If you want to support me further, you can join my Patreon. That's a great option. It helps a lot, and you get some bonus content. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.